Hi, we're having a conversation with Christian Sandström, PhD and researcher at the Ratio Institute in Sweden. And Christian, let's talk about green jobs. Are green jobs that good?
It's a good question. There's been a shift in the whole environmental debate over the last, I think, 5-6 years, where, historically, environmental concern was put an opposite to economic growth. That either you had growth, but then you destroyed the environment, or you cared about the environment and you had less growth. Now, over the last years, that has changed, where politicians increasingly in Europe, but also in the United States, say that there is no contradiction any longer, that we can have economic growth by investing in renewable energy. We get economic growth, we get new green jobs, and at the same time, we care about the environment. So, the trade-off that used to be the debate is being communicated now rather as an opportunity. That, for instance, in the European Union, leaders of the Commission say that if we impose tougher regulations and we make public investments in renewable energy, we're going to create 5 to 6 million jobs up until 2020. And that all sounds fantastic, doesn't it?
Indeed.
Yes.
But in Spain, for example, green jobs cost money. I mean, actually, every green job that is created actually ends up producing less, and so there is no growth.
This whole concept, it sounds very promising. It sounds great, and it's something, politicians love it because they can promise everything all of a sudden, and we know politicians like to do that, right? The problems here are many. One, how do you define a green job? In the U.S. presidential election in 2008, Obama talked about green jobs, and Hillary Clinton talked about green jobs, and then McCain talked about green jobs. There was no definition of what is actually a green job. Nobody had said, what is a green job? And this is not trivial. If you're an engineer trying to make a better, more efficient combustion engine, is that a green job? If you are an accountant at a windmill company, is that a green job? How do you define those things? That is one. Second, as you point out, green jobs quite often have turned out to cost money. There was a study by Gabriel Calzada and some of his colleagues at Instituto Juan de Mariana in Spain, where they showed this, that the green jobs actually cost money, and they destroy jobs because all that money which would have been used somewhere else in the economy, then through those public investments in renewable energy, if the cost of that job is too high or even higher than what is normally the cost for a job in the economy, then you haven't created jobs. You have net destroyed jobs, which was the case there.
So it is still valid, this trade-off between being green and being productive or being for growth. Is there a contradiction?
I'm not sure. So what I've done now in my recent book, Are Green Jobs Promising the Moon?, is I go through scientific research on this topic, and I try to make a balanced assessment. Is there any support for this idea? And my conclusion is that at present there is not support for it in scientific research, that there is no trade-off any longer. that might become the case later on. It might be in the future so that renewable energy can create new jobs and economic growth. It might be. We just don't know today. So we don't know today whether that is the case or not. Yet at the same time, you see how politicians promise that we're going to spark a new industrial revolution, is what the president of the European Commission said. And we're going to create 6 million new jobs. And they make all these promises, but you look at the actual facts that they have to back it all up, and there's very little support, there's very little evidence.
What is the reaction to these discoveries or this evidence?
It's a good question. I think politicians generally are not very happy to hear this because they like to be able to promise everything, right? It's a very nice concept if you want to get elected. And I think also a lot of the companies prospering from all this, in solar energy and in wind power, etc., they prosper around the subsidies and the idea that those subsidies are going to be beneficial for society. So I don't think they will be very happy either to hear that there's no support for it. The larger industrial sector might be more positive about it because after all, someone's going to pay the bill for all this. And it usually ends up being higher electricity prices for manufacturing companies. So they might be more appealed to the arguments presented, yeah?
In the meantime, governments in Europe, for example, are in big trouble, financial problems. Some of these problems may be related to energy and the way they use energy. What are the options? If green jobs do not work, if green technologies are not that promising, what is the option?
Well, being in a prolonged and structural recession, as many European economies are at present, it is, I think, dangerous to allocate resources based upon a lack of evidence that it actually works. And some of the stimulus packages in those countries, about 10-20% is allocated to green energy. So in the first place, if you are in a deep recession, you need to be very careful about how you spend your money, especially if you aspire to get economic growth. So if you want to do this based upon concern for the environment, then go ahead, do so. But at present, there seems to be a cost related to it. And I think most voters throughout European countries are not entirely happy to pay that bill. But I think the dilemma is that the cost is distributed over such a large population that the amount of money each individual is paying by the tax bill is very small, so they don't really care.
Is this principle applicable to the US, for example?
Yes. The United States has made similar investments, and it was a large part of Obama's stimulus package was related to green jobs and green growth. And it's a really interesting story here, which illustrates just how little evidence they have before spending all this money. That for many years, Obama, when speaking about green growth, he referred to Spain as a success story. And then comes this one study from a think tank in Spain arguing that this does not work. It has created a bubble. It has cost a lot of money. It doesn't work. And it got a lot of media attention in the United States. So all of a sudden, Obama had to stopped talking about Spain as a positive example. He had to say Denmark instead of Spain in his speeches and say, we are to make the same investments now when we've been lagging behind, etc. So he started to do that instead, and he imposed on his administration to investigate the study done in Spain and in order to refute it and come up with a counter argument. And it's all very strange how such one small study on the other side of the planet can have such consequences. And my conclusion is that the original reason for that is that they didn't know what they were doing in the first place. They had no solid evidence. And then it's enough that, there comes one study criticizing and they all of a sudden they're in a lot of trouble,
Finally, Christian, what about the developing nations? What is their option?
In terms of energy?
In terms of energy and in terms of the growth, green opposition?
That's a good question. I think, to start with, all this technology is still quite immature. And it is difficult for developing countries to make those investments. Now, you see what China has done. A lot of the technology around solar and wind power has been developed in Denmark, in Germany over the last 10 years. But jobs are increasingly outsourced to China, and Chinese domestic production is increasing. So it seems if the intention was to get green jobs from the beginning in Denmark and Germany, it seems the green jobs are ending up in China. But that is the labor intensive dimension of it. It's not the R&D intensive dimension of it. So manufacturing, yes, that might be one option. But it's still technology that relies upon subsidies from the Western world, and that makes it quite risky to be in the whole business and be reliant upon it, because subsidies can be withdrawn very quickly when politicians realize it doesn't work. And when that happens, what's going to happen to the industry? So I think it's risky.
Christian, thank you very much for sharing these experiences and ideas with us, and thank you too.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you.